Right on. Well, I know people may be joining us as we continue the meeting. I do want to share our agenda and what we'll be doing today. So first, welcome to all of you who are joining us for Housing on the Ballot, what it looks like to be engaging with candidates in 2024 as C3 organizations. I would like to do some quick introductions and just share an update about one of our speakers. So we have joining us Bailey Sutter from the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, who will be kicking us off with a bit of those do's and don'ts of C3 electoral engagement. We're going to be looking to Nicholas Struck who is the voter outreach specialist at the Office of Minnesota Secretary of State. And I'm sorry, Bailey, Bailey's title is the Public Policy Manager. And then Fadumo Mohammed, who's the Civic Engagement and Advocacy Manager of IATA Leads, is going to be joining us a little later as well. And so we are just going to be going through a bit of a journey of all the different ways that we can engage to make sure that we are helping shape the future of Minnesota, aligning values and actions and making sure that we're doing that in the way we're best able. And so Bailey, I know we covered that you are looking to share your screen to jump into the presentation. I just want to extend a warm welcome from the housing community, but also from MHP. Thanks so much, and kick us off, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much. It's great to be here. I'm just pulling up my presentation here. And of course, it's always a little clunky, right? To do the share your screen thing. So can I just get a quick thumbs up from folks that, yay, you can see the screen? Okay, awesome.
We can
Cool.
see it.
Beautiful. Well, like Madeline said, my name is Bailey. I work at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. I started back in January, so still kind of new to the org, but not new to the nonprofit world in any way. Previously, I was more in the education world, so if you were ever there, maybe we know each other, but it's great to see you all, and thanks again for being here on a Friday morning, a very humid Friday morning, as we discussed before the call. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about nonprofits and elections, as you can see. But first, I wanted to take a second and introduce MCN's public policy team. We actually have a full team now of 3, which is very exciting. My boss is Marie, and a lot of you probably know her already because she presents at all sorts of things and is just a wealth of information. She's a lawyer by trade, which is great. Shawnee is our newest hire, which focuses on research, and then that's me on the bottom. But our public policy team does a lot of work to overall advance the work of the nonprofit sector as a whole. So for me, this is my first interface with a housing specific group. So I'm really excited to be here and kind of dive into that world a little bit and thinking about the lens of what housing orgs need to think about with elections. So what I would like some folks to do, and I apologize in advance, this is going to be a little bit interactive for me, which I know it's a little early and it's Friday, but bear with me. Engage as you please, no pressure to do so. But I would just love to hear in the chat, or I guess read in the chat, your name, your pronouns, the organization you represent, and the physical location you're in around the state. Because I know we have some rural folks here, some metro folks, and I kind of want to get a sense of who people are. Oh my gosh, we got some DC folks. Okay. Our team will be in DC next week, so maybe we'll see you around. If you see us, say hi. I'll be the one sweating with my hair up. It's going to be 95 degrees next week. Got some Habitat folks, Bloomington. Love it. Cool. Thank you, everybody. So another interactive question I have for all of you after you've taken time to write, your name, pronouns, where you're from. I'd like you to think about your earliest or perhaps your favorite memory of participating in civic engagement. So go back in time a little bit, 10, 20, 50 years ago, however long ago it was, what do you remember as your first interaction with civic engagement? And that doesn't necessarily mean voting, right? But it could be. So while you're typing and kind of thinking about your particular example, I'll share mine because I've had time to think about this. But my first memory of civic engagement was when my parents put a political sign in our yard. I was probably in fourth grade, maybe. And I remember the sign was green. And that threw me off quite a bit because I thought all political things had to be blue or red. And so that green color really stands out to me as like, oh, it's not a binary. Oh, you can get creative with colors and therefore maybe creative with your politics. And so that was my first memory that was really powerful. And just seeing my parents, show their involvement, show who they were voting for to our neighbors who, looking back probably disagreed with them. And so as I'm looking in the chat, I see some folks talking about ban the box, going to the polls with parents. Yes, absolutely. School board, working during the midterms, turning out people to vote, handing out lit. Yep. A lot of these are very relationship based, it looks like. That's kind of a pattern that I see a little bit. And a lot of parents. Absolutely. Cool. Feel free to keep putting in your memories if you'd like to, but I'll keep going. And I just want to share a little bit of the outline for today. I'm going to talk about the role of nonprofits in elections, how we stay nonpartisan, a little bit of info about the 2024 election, but not too much because I know Nick and some other folks will be covering that. And then if we have time, I'll go into specific strategies. But just know this presentation will be downloaded and shared. So if for some reason we don't have time to go through all the strategies and resources, that's okay. Just because I want the focus today to really be on what housing orgs can and can't do for the elections. And so 2 things I want to have folks take away, and obviously the first one is circled, is that nonprofits play a super critical role as a trusted messenger when it comes to elections. And that's, I would say, heightened just because we're in such a polarized time. But nonprofits, especially on a hyper local level, are very, very trusted. And I have some stats to share later that really highlights what that looks like. And the second part is nonprofits absolutely can and should do voter engagement. And I read a quote recently that stood out to me, which was basically like nonprofits can't do everything, right? We all have limited capacity. We don't have those unrestricted grant funds, but we can do something. And so throughout this presentation, I want you to be thinking about like, what's one thing we can do about elections this year? And it can be something big, it can be something small, something in between, but everybody can do something. And I'm hoping that you'll see something that stands out as something that fits for your particular organization. So another interactive question for you is, why do you think nonprofits should even care about elections to begin with? Like, for a lot of us, our missions don't include elections or voter outreach. But why should we care as a sector? Why should we care about elections? Why do they matter to us? So throw that in the chat and we'll see what folks are thinking. Grant funding, Maeve, high five to you. Yes, grant funding, absolutely. Our policies affect the people we serve, and program funding and elections have consequences. Yes, yes, they do. Yes, so nonprofits absolutely should care about elections. And I'm going to keep going again just for the sake of time, but feel free to keep dropping your answers in the chat. Oh, I really like impacting lives and our neighbors. Yes. It's important with housing stability. Yes, those are great answers. And so we know that nonprofits help drive voter turnout. And this isn't me talking. This is people have researched this quite a bit. And one particular statistic that I want to throw your way that I think about way too often now that I know it is that Americans engaged by nonprofits saw a 10% increase in voter turnout compared to similar voters who weren't engaged. So if you've ever worked in politics, ever worked on a campaign, there are campaign staffers that would kill to get a 10-point difference, right, in their turnout. And so if you think about it that way, that's the difference between so many different elections and what consequence they might have, especially in a state like ours that is maybe culturally Democratic, but in reality is a little more purple and a little more split down the line. So we make a huge, huge difference. And I don't want us to discount that because we have those connections in the community. And I also really like what this person said about like nonprofits being a known person or a known group. Chances are somebody recognizes your logo or has a relationship with you in the community, and that goes a really, really long way. And of course, nonprofits are trusted as well. There's, again, a lot of statistics about this, but another stat that, again, I've thought way too much about now that I know it, is that 7 in 10 voters want nonprofits to engage because they are a trusted, nonpartisan resource. And again, in this time of polarization, people know that you are providing accurate information, which is huge. And so our second key point of today is that nonprofits legally can and should do voter engagement, which is not news to any of you, but still bears repeating. So we're going to do a little quiz right now. So keep your chat option open again. But I just want to see what folks already know and kind of talk about some important things that, again, is usually not a surprise, but is important to repeat. And so this first question is, nonprofits must remain nonpartisan. Is that true or false? So type A into the chat box if you think it's true, B into the box if you think it is false. Seeing a lot of A's, one B, couple of A's, awesome. So the answer is true, and I should clarify that's 501c3s specifically. We'll talk about C4s in a little bit, which is a little different, but generally speaking, nonprofits must remain nonpartisan, and that is a big part of the 501c3 framework legally. So our next question is, to vote in Minnesota, a person must be A, at least 18, B, a citizen, C, a Minnesota resident of at least 20 days, D, not currently incarcerated for a felony offense, or E, all of the above. Seeing a lot of E's. Yep. You guys know. Yes, you're correct. All of those things must be true. But I do want to bring up something important is that if you do look at voter registration, people have to be citizens. And that's a pretty important rule to remember that we'll talk about a little bit later too. All right, and so this next question, to vote in Minnesota, do people need to bring an ID to the polls? And so A is yes, B is no, C is depends, and D is, I don't know, I'm not sure. And that's okay to say you don't know. I'm seeing B, C, B, D, B, C. All right. Love it. This one was a little bit of a trick question. I'm sorry I tricked you, but it's important and it can relate to housing for a number of reasons, which is why I wanted to highlight it. So the answer is it depends. And this is a screenshot pulled from the Secretary of State's website. And the short answer is it depends on if you've moved and if you're already registered. And so just again, for the sake of time, I'll keep going. And I know Nick will be talking more about that, but just know most of the time people don't need to bring an ID, but depending on your situation, you might need to. So we already said nonprofits must remain nonpartisan. But I also want to highlight a little bit of what nonprofits can and can't do on a very basic level overall. And so we'll get into more details, but again, this is kind of like an overall 30,000 foot view before we dive in. So as I said, with the 501c3 law, nonprofits, 501c3s need to remain nonpartisan, and we can absolutely do things that relate to the art of voting, which includes education, registration, get out the vote. And a unique one is we can also support ballot measure questions. And I don't have time to go into too much detail on that today, but that is something to keep in mind if there is something related to your particular subsector that comes up in the future. But again, on a very zoomed out point of view, 501c3s can't support or oppose specific candidates for office or support or oppose political parties. So as you can see, and this is a very vague, very general rule that is helpful for me as somebody with ADHD to kind of see the big picture before I dive in, is that things that relate to the art of voting are usually good, and things that are really specific with people and political parties are something we generally want to stay away from. So with nonprofits, there are a bunch of different things that we can do. You can definitely advocate for your issues during an election year. Absolutely. Keep doing that. Keep talking about housing and what your needs are. You can also educate all candidates, and that all is really important. Just so you don't look partisan, focusing on certain candidates or not. On issues that are related to the purview of your organization. You can absolutely conduct nonpartisan voter education sessions and sponsor candidate debates. However, it is important to think about the context, right? The IRS looks at things in context, which is helpful in some ways, but not in other ways, because it's not a hard and fast rule. So, for example, if you are hosting a debate or education session with candidates, but only candidates from one particular political party have confirmed and are saying, yes, we'll be there, that's something you might want to consider talking with your organization and board about, because that could look partisan, as if you're maybe only supporting or providing an opportunity for one particular political party. So again, that has a little bit of a grain of salt with it, but that context is really important to think about. And this next part, establishing a 501c4, that's a different category of nonprofit. And there's a whole different set of rules that comes with C4s. And so just an example I'll share is gender justice. A lot of you have probably heard about them in the reproductive space. Gender justice has their C3, which follows the nonprofit rules, but they also have a separate C4 called Gender Justice Action. And they have a totally different set of rules. And so if you're talking to your staff and your board and you think a C4 might make sense for our organization, just make note that there's a lot of education that comes along with that. And I would recommend really, diving into seeing what those rules are and keeping a very firm line of separation between your C3 and your C4 legally, and just with perception, that's super important. But it is a very doable thing that I think more and more nonprofits are looking into nowadays. So this is the part that probably most of you are most interested in. And so I'm sorry the font is a little small, bear with me on that. But these are in mind with what housing orgs can do, thinking if you have shelters, if you have other physical spaces where folks live. And so you can absolutely share nonpartisan voting resources with residents who live in your org's housing facilities. For example, if there are different mailbox, you can literally take a one-pager, a nonpartisan one-pager about elections and how to vote. You can put it in all their mailboxes. That is totally okay. And your org's logo can be on the literature. And I would recommend it would be on the literature because you guys are trusted folks in your community and people know you. You can door knock residents, encourage them to vote. One important part of that is for the folks door knocking, make sure they're wearing attire that couldn't be interpreted as partisan. So obviously don't wear any candidate's shirt or button or anything like that. I think for me, if I was doing it, I would wear your organization's shirt or just something very plain, so they don't look like it's a candidate door knocking them. You can absolutely offer transportation to the polls and provide that for as many residents as you're able to. I think that's a great one. You can encourage folks to take advantage of early voting, especially if you're working with the homeless and highly mobile population. This might be a big area to focus on because you have more time and resources that might fit better with that particular population. Again, we can register folks to vote. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really important that they're citizens. It can be a deportable offense if somebody registers and they are not a citizen. So that's something to keep in mind. That's important. If your particular housing organization has a shelter, I would also consider adjusting your curfew times if you have one. So clients don't have to choose between voting and having a place to sleep that night. Just because the polls close at 8 and sometimes people aren't able to vote until 8:30, 8:45 if there's a big line. I would encourage folks to not make people make that choice between the two since they're both important. But that's one that's unique to this sector specifically. I'm going to shout out to Nick again and the Secretary of State's office, but most helpful bunch of government employees I think you could ask for in terms of accessibility and resources and offerings and coming to where you are. So don't hesitate to reach out to them and say, hey, can you come help us register folks? Can you come help us do XYZ? They're really great at that. Nick, Michael Wall, and there's plenty of other folks as well. Another one which could be very helpful, again, depending on your context, is discussing with your election official the possibility of using your org as a polling site. And I will say this is a much bigger category of things, right? There's a lot that goes into picking a polling site, but I don't think it hurts to ask or bring it up or inquire about the process of how those get selected, to think about the accessibility factor for your particular constituents. You can use your shelter or, apartment complex, obviously, for voting address. And there is a little bit of information about the specificity with Minnesota on that. And again, this presentation will be shared, so no worrying about writing all this down or memorizing it. I do want to highlight this resource about a housing-focused voter guide. This has so many great pieces to it, and so we've linked it in here. And I encourage you to check this out later on. There's a lot of specific examples and things we don't have time for today, but it is a very helpful resource. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what nonprofits can't do. And again, we kind of talked about this in the big picture overall, but still important to discuss. And so, like I said, when it comes to specific political party or candidate, it's usually a big no-no. So your org cannot endorse candidates for office or make campaign contributions, or ask a candidate to sign a pledge on any specific issue. It's also really important that even though you might work with an elected official on a housing issue, to not post anything that communicates that your org is in support of them or that they'll, help this housing policy if they get elected. And so that can be kind of a fine line sometimes and feel a little iffy. So definitely reach out if there are questions or you're not really sure if that crosses the line or not. I think it's also important that you don't only publicize candidates that support your particular policies, especially in your newsletters. And I would also consider thinking about like the context overall, where if we're getting closer to election season or are already in it, that it might not be great to give an award to somebody who's going to be on the ballot in about 2, 3 months, right? Because that, though you're not necessarily endorsing them, that could look like a tacit endorsement because you're giving them an award. And so, again, that's just something to think about where perception from the public is a really helpful, helpful thing. And I know for me, sometimes I think about like, if I didn't know anything about this org and I saw this, what would my first thought be? Would my thought be, oh, they're connected, they're saying vote for them? Those are just things to think about a little bit. But it's also really important if you are doing voter engagement or registration, not to push folks toward a specific party or candidate. And some folks might ask you point blank, who does your organization support? And it's important to say, like, you know, we're not supporting anybody as an organization. We're not allowed to, but we do have these nonpartisan resources for you to look at to learn more about the process and, you know, come to your own conclusion. So with the 2024 elections coming up, I just briefly want to hit on which offices are up for election, because this does impact what housing nonprofits need to think about in terms of relationship building and in terms of, you know, your own policies, right? And again, this is important to keep separate from your voter engagement work, but more thinking about your strategy and how you might need to interact with folks, especially if a new person is elected for your district or the person, your champion, wasn't elected, and kind of building relationships with new folks. And again, kind of keeping that separate from if people want to know who you support, why, who are the people pushing your policies. Those are important to your org for sure, but not something to bring up with voter engagement work. And so this is the elections calendar, which again, I'll just go through this really quickly due to time, but we're a couple months out and we are in election season. So if you're planning to do all the things, it's coming up. So I know I have to wrap up in a few minutes, but I do want to ask folks what you think is a big voting advantage that we have in Minnesota. So throw that in the chat box and be specific. What do we have in Minnesota that helps us vote? Same day registration. I love same day registration. It's amazing. Vouching. Yep, absolutely. Yes. So we have early and absentee ballot, or excuse me, early and absentee voting, in addition to same day registration and automatic registration. And we do have a lot of different ways to vote. And I just want to highlight this with this particular group, because if you're working with folks who are homeless and highly mobile, you can kind of take advantage of these different ways and do what makes the most sense for the needs of your constituents. So for the sake of time, actually, I'm going to skip this question about your most successful voter engagement strategies and barriers. But I want to highlight some tips and tools real quick before I hop off about some ways to increase turnout. There are some really great resources that I wanted to highlight for this particular group. Obviously, we have voter registration, we have National Voter Registration Day, youth voting. This is a good one. This is one I particularly want to highlight with this group. There's a group called Nonprofit Vote, and it was actually founded sort of by MCN. MCN was a part of it many years ago. And so if you don't have an explicit policy for your particular organization to help your employees know that they can vote, they get time off to vote, and just encourage a general culture of voting, I really encourage you to look to look that up. And they also have a ton of resources and a toolkit to share with your employees, just so folks know and can pass that information along to their constituents as well. One more thing I wanted to highlight real quick is that I know nonprofits have a lot going on, right? I think it's the case of most people where it's like, I don't have time to do anything extra. I don't have time to even think about creating a new work plan or a new strategy. And I've absolutely been there and know that feeling very well. And what I would say is think about what is some low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and what is that one simple thing that your organization can do for this round of elections. And I always think about like the number one rule of outreach is going to where people already are. And so I also think about that in a digital way as well. And for me, that often looks like an email signature where you just have info in your email signature about elections and links and resources. That's a really easy one. And so for your organization, one thing I want you to be thinking about is what are the things you're already doing and that are already built into your programs and your staff, what your staff does, and just bring elections info along with that. So that way it can feel less overwhelming and that can be built upon in future years. But if you're not necessarily doing a ton of things right now, like that's just one step to do. And so the last thing I will say is I just wanted to bring up that voting is a social habit. And so as we talked about in the first question of what was your earliest memory about civic engagement, I noticed a lot of the answers were involved with maybe one or two other people, right? For me, it was my parents and their political sign in the yard. One person talked about going to the polls with their parents. And so I think what could be my biggest takeaway is that voting is personal and voting is a community, it's a community muscle, right? And so be thinking about that as well, that a lot of times it's really about those one-on-one conversations. It's about building it into the things you're already doing. And so as you can see right here, one of the best predictors of whether somebody votes is whether people around them vote. And so let's continue to make it a culture and to keep, sharing these really important resources. And in this presentation, there's a whole bunch of other slides about ways to tie in elections, different resources, and we'll get that sent out. But if you ever want to have a conversation or you want to talk more about the specific rules we went through, feel free to reach out. I know I can help, other folks can help, we're here for that. But I would also say don't let the fear of messing up or breaking a rule prevent you from getting involved. And so again, we're here to help calm any of those nerves and provide the best support that we can. Just reach out. My info will be in the PowerPoint. But I'll be turning it over to the next person, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Bailey, thank you so much for sharing that information, the numerous resources, and also the strategies that we can take home. Like Bailey shared, this is a PowerPoint that we are going to share out. So those will be accessible and available to all of you, as well as her contact information for those specifics. I'm going to take just a moment. We're going to take 1 minute, and I'm going to see if there are any questions with attendees before we transition over to Faduma Mohammed of IATA Leads. All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you. So I would like to welcome now Faduma Mohammed of IATA Leads. If when she's ready, come on camera. I know that she is with us. Welcome. Please do take a moment, introduce yourself, introduce the work of IATA Leads and the way that you all are engaging with community as a C3 nonprofit this election season.
Thank you, Madeline, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Father Mohammed. I work for Ayada Leads, and bear with me while I connect my PowerPoints to this Zoom. I have been with Ayada Leads for about a year now, and we are a nonprofit organization located here in Minneapolis. We work specifically with African diaspora individuals and new immigrants and youth within 18 to 24 range in college. And yeah, honestly, I'm just here to kind of just chit chat with y'all. It's not too formal. My first question for you is, where does the power come from your campaigns? Also, how do I get rid of this little, oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, where does power come from your campaigns? Like, what is a successful campaign to you? Do you draw from stories, community, ideas? So you can pop that in the chat and we can go from there. The people. Well, yes, Madeline, you're right. For us, honestly, like I believe in like four things, and a lot of this as well. You can find resources on this at the U of M. Cura has a Neighborhoods Now program that's really amazing. But organizing people, organizing money, organizing ideas, and organizing actions. Like honestly, a lot of our movements wouldn't get as far as they did without this lived experiences of whether it's housing justice, repro justice, or economic justice. We are all working within systems of change to make a more dignified living space for all of us, whether it's doing tenants' rights and having those hard conversations with landlords, or sometimes even them taking them to court and having to do all of the escrow process, or also like having those moments where we run campaigns like Bring It Home, or expanding democracy agenda and trying to restore rights that have been taken away, like the State Voting Rights Act. 50 years of precedent just gone, and now we have an entire community in Minnesota that came together this legislative session to protect that here and codify that in Minnesota. And so I really like do believe organizing comes from the people, and the best way to organize your people is to honestly talk to them, building your base, figuring out where their strengths are, because some folks are good at coming in with the base building, some folks are good at choosing issues, some folks are good at that research and like doing that community power analysis and having that conversation where they actually survey each other. And that's something we did for one of our things, community contract for deed reform. It was an initiative in which the Somali community was being targeted for contract for deed sales, and they would put stipulations in saying if you missed a payment, you didn't make it current within 60 days, that you would lose your home. And that was a process that had been going on for years. And we had the community talk to us and tell us their lived experiences. And through that, we had the community engage each other and do the research to collect those stories. And those stories are research and data and a power analysis. And it was unfortunate that those experiences had to happen for us to get there. But it was also really powerful seeing leaders amongst leaders take that initiative. But yeah, so that's about organizing people. Money, I know all of us are all in the nonprofit fishbowl, and the foundations are putting in flakes, and we're trying to secure that money and trying to get our initiatives funded so we can like actually like make the change that we want to see in the world. But I also understand that like it's hard, and for us, we do a lot of like grassroots organizing and like organizing money within the community, and then also like connecting with organizations that are already doing the work and like not trying to reinvent the wheel, because there's so many orgs that work with African diaspora community as well, and we have a lot of similar issues. So I always believe in like reaching across the aisle and being like, hey, in what ways can we work together to push this work forward and not create 6 new initiatives, and now you have 5 organizations working on one thing, when we can put our money together and put our ideas together and actually like mobilize a larger community and ask for change. And whether it's at the legislature, at a policy level, or whether it's at the city council on a local level. And then organizing ideas. I think this really comes back to people. For me, when I was doing one of our housing justice initiatives, and we were trying to put together essentially a cookout initiative to get policymakers to come and talk to us. A lot of the community members were like, I want to be involved in this process. Like, I don't want to just come to a coalition meeting and be told what to do. Like, I want to contribute to those spaces. And so we created a lateral leadership system where we, instead of us coming with like an already set agenda, we had folks who were really eager come to that table and help us set the agenda and help us set the charge and help us set the policy and the campaign. Because at the end of the day, like, the community knows what it needs more than we know what it needs. So I think it's like, oh, also like being humble and like stepping into space in a way where like you are a leader amongst leaders, and like empowering people to like take action, or empowering people to become decision makers because they're already there. So I guess it's really taking inventory of their strengths and then organizing for action. I always say, are we ready to win? And like, what does our action look like? Is that a lobby day? Is that us door knocking, trying to like gather support? Is that us, and it's okay if you don't agree with this, but is this like, pulling up to your senator's house and be like, hey, what's going on, and applying pressure if they're ignoring the issue? And so whatever that looks like for you, it can look different, but just being ready to like mobilize this information. But I know I said a lot, so if there's any questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat. But yeah. And so these are a few of the things we worked on. I stated contract for deed. That was a great one in which collaboration helped. We were trying to work within a community that already had things set up, and we connected with Legal Aid and Habitat for Humanity and Isaroon, and those were really amazing organizations that were already doing the work. And so we were able to actually get things done a lot quicker versus us kind of reinventing the wheel. And also just, it's a lot. Like, I know as organizers, we have so many different hats, and as nonprofit employees, we do probably 6 million things, and campaigns are hard. So really, that was one where I leaned on the community a lot, and we collected our wins, and Governor Wall signed it finally. So that was really exciting.
Oh, me too.
Hello? I thought I heard someone say something. Anyway, and then communities combating hate was one where like we used storytelling and narrative to push. We had a video series where we had members from the Muslim community and the Jewish community just talk about their experiences with like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And like we also talked about like the ways in which like they see hope within Minneapolis and Minnesota, and the things we each can do to like just combat the hate that's going on. And we had a really an amazing multiracial coalition push for that, and all those bills passed, thank God, last session. And so I really just want to stress that this is really about like building community, building money, and then building strategy. And I really think like empowering decision makers to take the lead will like also make sure that when these bills do pass, they're not just passed in an echo chamber, that like the community can actually like spread it word of mouth, and like people know how to utilize their rights. And I think that's like a big thing for me as like an individual and an organizer. I want to do things like that impact the spirit of the law, just not change the law in name only. So yeah, and a lot of the times I just ask myself what brings me to the work, and like center that in a lot of the conversations I have. And honestly, having a lot of one-on-ones, it takes a lot of intentional conversation with fellow organizers, nonprofits, and community members to really like figure out like, why are we doing this, and what is our like end goal, and what are our demands and targets, and who are our allies. And yeah, so I guess that's my question to you. What brings you to the work? And you don't have to answer here, but I think it's something really important to think about and center. And my timer is going off. I know that's my time, but I will stay on for a moment if there's any questions.
Yeah, if I could just ask Fadumo, thinking about this election season and engaging with our community and making sure, we're getting voter registration, we're doing get out the vote. Are there one or two activities that you would be raising up that IATA Lead is doing to make sure that the community is participating in our democracy this summer and this fall?
Yes, Madeline. Sorry, I was also reading the chat.
Oh,
From
yeah.
Isaroon said. So For your to answer your question, we have a forum for 61A, and you can get involved in that and come ask questions. We're also going to be doing a cookout for voter engagement with Common Cause, and maybe Madeline from our Future Starts at Home come join us and see what happens. We're looking for people to just come engage with community. We think the best way is like to like feed people, have a cookout, and like if they want to register to vote, great. And if they are already registered, even better. And then we're also going to be doing like a campaign school. We'll be doing one for like grassroots organizing, like what does city council do, what does elections do, what is going to be on the ballot in the primary. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. I can drop my information in the chat. And then I do want to lift up what Farah said in the chat, and I want to answer this question. When there is a political polarization and voters seem disengaged, how can you narrow the gap between the politicians and the voters that you are trying to reach? I'm not gonna lie, I'm answering this from my like perspective as an organizer and as an individual, and like not as like a, this is the only way to do this. So I want to disclaim that. But for me, like I ran into a lot of that when we did our high school voter registration week. Kids were like, I don't want to vote, like the system doesn't care about me. And like my lived experience is not being centered in these political campaigns. And a lot of the conversations I had was like the elections are more micro too, like at the local level, like you having the degree requirement being taken away, or like rent vouchers coming back, and like the people and the judges who decide on like the cases, like the state voting rights act, and like taking that away, and just having conversations of like your vote matters like more deeper at a local level and at a federal level. But like the day-to-day people that run the Senate and the House and City Council decide what happens in your city, decides how much money the school board decides, how much money your schools are going to get. And just having that conversation and really like trying to give a real world example of like how this individual's role will affect like your day-to-day life, and like that's been helpful. But then I also do like acknowledge what they're saying of like things are hard, and like it's easy to feel like isolated and also kind of like disengaged from the system. And I think acknowledging it and not just trying to like push to vote, because at the end of the day they are stating real things. So I try to honor their truths, and then also bring in like how at the local level their vote really matters. And I try to talk about the federal level, but it's hard because then you get lost in the sauce. But I hope that answered your question. I have like really tried to the best of my ability, and I'm always down to chat. So I'm gonna leave my info. Anyone can hit me up for a one-on-one. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Kadumo. So appreciated. We are now going to pass it over to Nicholas, who is going to share some resources from the Office of the Secretary of State that are available to all of us here in Minnesota. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Nick. I'm the voter outreach specialist at the Secretary of State's office here at the Capitol. And I'm just going to kind of talk about a few of the different resources that we like to offer, and talk about how we kind of engage in our different partnerships. So my main role is kind of reach out to businesses and affordable housing, nonprofits, and other organizations, chambers of commerce, and really anybody else that's willing to work with us and see how we might be able to form a partnership and really go over what we can provide and how we can support you. You know, there's a lot of different ways that we like to establish these partnerships. It might be through a one-on-one. We've hosted tablings where we help people with voter registration. We've partnered with organizations like the League of Women Voters, who help us by volunteering some of their members to work at our different tablings if we don't have the capacity to help with. We love making connections between different organizations. We're actually working with the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits in Bailey to have Secretary Simon speak at a summit that they're holding later in the summer. And so it's really exciting to kind of see all the different connections we can make and really come together and try and bring Minnesota back to being the #1 in voter participation. You know, we were #1 in 2016, 2018, 2020, and we fell to #3 in 2022. So, you know, we're really working hard to try and reclaim our spot. You know, as Minnesotans, we're very competitive. So I'm going to share my screen just for this little page that we put together the other day, and it's still in the works. We still have to update a lot of different stuff, try to make it a little less wordy. Let me know if you guys can see that. Awesome.
Good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, so this just kind of is a little overview of the different resources that we offer in the materials. So we have stuff about voter registration applications, absentee ballot applications. You know, if you guys ever have a desire to have a voter registration drive, we can provide you with a lot of these applications for you to have on site as physical copies instead of having to print them off yourselves free of cost. Of course, it depends on the nature of it. If it is like a high order, we might not have all of that. It might take time. So it might just be easier to print them. But, you know, we also have these as downloadable digital copies on our site that you're free to use. And all of this that I'm mentioning is also mostly gone over on our site. You know, it's just a great one-stop shop for all this information and more. Feel free to link our site or anything else we have on our website that you think could be good on your advocacy pages or finding ways to vote, helping inform your people. The next kind of bigger topic that we like to provide to partners, so feel free to reach out to me if you ever have an interest in something like this, is our toolkit. It kind of goes into a lot of different suggested messaging techniques, some specific quotes that you can use, social media graphics, kind of timeline. You know, we know that a lot of the organizations we work with have different needs and different causes that they're fighting for and different ways that they can engage their people and get their people excited about getting out to vote. So, you know, we always encourage people to feel free to adjust this messaging or employ it however you see fit, just as long as the core information is correct. That's all we can really ask for. The next bigger thing is kind of our fact sheets. We have about, I think, 17 fact sheets in 11 different languages and English. The fact sheets are just kind of a really handy tool for informing people about some different aspects. We have stuff about voting without a permanent address for those that might be experiencing housing instability. We have information about healthcare and social services that we just created last week. We're always looking to make more. We're in the process of making one about becoming an election judge and, you know, getting people involved in our poll working and seeing what the process is actually like. So these are just a ton of different informational little half sheet graphics that we think is a really great way to kind of inform people and, you know, have on physical copies that you can order from us for free or print and use yourselves or use in newsletters. We encourage people to post them at libraries and community centers and on bulletins or, you know, for housing organizations. We've had some that like to have it in their tenant packets or resident intro materials. And kind of the last bigger thing that we enjoy to offer is our Voter 101. This is a great way to really engage your communities by informing them about some different topics of voter engagement and what the elections process is actually like. It's a great tool that our director puts on, where she puts on about an hour-long presentation with some time at the end for Q&A to really go over different topics. It's very flexible, can be in person, online, with presentation that we can adjust depending on the materials you want to go over, and so much more. And then the last kind of new development that we're still in the works of finishing up is our new translated tools and materials. On our website now, you can translate these 6 different tools online that into the 10 most non-English spoken languages in Minnesota. So it's a really great way to kind of engage communities that might not have English as their primary or first language. And it's, you know, we like to kind of make sure people understand that while they may be very well spoken in English, you know, it's a great way to kind of engage them in some other topics. And when it comes to the more official language and some of the language that we have in the registration process or an absentee ballot application, it's very we found it's very helpful to be able to translate it into a language that they might be more comfortable with. So, you know, feel free to reach out to me. I have my email down here and I'll throw it in the chat. If you organizations ever want to partner up or discuss any of these materials, get some of these, request some, or form future partnerships. So thank you so much.
Any questions for Nicholas as we're wrapping up our session here today? Well, excellent. Do feel free. I know that we had one in the chat earlier, but first, just want to extend a deep in the spirit of appreciation, big thank you to Bailey, Nicholas, and Fadumo for sharing some of the resources, strategies, and ways that we can engage in the election season this year. I know that they're sharing contact information, and I do just want to share a reminder that the PowerPoints that were used today are going to be shared out with all of you, recognizing the resources that are available, the networks that we can build. And also, let's recognize that we have a big opportunity to make housing a priority at the elections this season, recognizing that no matter what we look like or where we come from, we belong in safe, healthy places to live that we can afford. And we have to make sure that Minnesotans have an opportunity to vote their values, and that's what these conversations are about. And so I just want to send a big thank you to also all of our attendees who made time on this happy Friday to join us and figure out how they want to engage how you want to engage your own community in this work. And that together we can create something powerful here in Minnesota. Would love to just take a moment and just say thank you and hope that everyone has a lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much and be well. You will receive a follow-up email. Have a happy Friday, y'all. Thank you, Nick, Bailey, and Fadumo so much. I hope that you all have a happy Friday as well.